Look at the base of your left thumb right now. Not your fingerprints. Not the line that crosses the center of your palm. The exact spot where the thumb meets the hand. That small, fleshy rise. That mound that anatomists call the thenar eminence. Right there. You are looking at it. Now imagine that 17 centuries ago, in a city where Greek thought, Egyptian wisdom, and the first currents of Jewish mysticism blended together, a scribe copied onto papyrus a sentence that would reach us through centuries of persecution, concealment, and deliberate oblivion. A sentence that says, and this is a direct translation from the original Greek text, that the human body was not built to lose itself in matter, but to remember the way back. The text is called the Corpus Hermeticum, and if the hermetists who transmitted it were right, the area you just observed on your hand is not simply connective tissue and subcutaneous fat. According to the tradition that this text inaugurates, it is what they called a gate of return. This is not a claim of folk magic. It is not social media numerology. It is not content about crystals and guardian angels. The Corpus Hermeticum is a real philosophical corpus, 17 treatises written in Greek between the 2nd and 3rd centuries of our era in Alexandria, Egypt. They are verifiable historical documents, preserved in manuscripts found today in the Laurentian Library in Florence and the National Library of France. Garth Fowden studies them in his work, The Egyptian Hermes. Wouter Hanegraaff analyzes them in Western Esotericism. Francis Yates cites them in Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic Tradition. The academic translation by Brian Copenhaver, published by Cambridge University Press in 1992, is available in universities throughout the Spanish-speaking world. These texts were translated into Latin for the first time in 1463, and from that moment on, they changed the course of Western thought, and they say things that most people have never heard. I am going to need to take you from the very beginning of what that text says about the human body, because to understand why the base of the left thumb matters, if it matters at all, first you have to understand the cosmology that the Corpus Hermeticum deploys in its first treatise. Not a simplified version, what the text actually says. The first treatise is called Poimandres. In Greek, the name means something roughly translatable as shepherd of men, or, in a more technical reading, mind of the sovereign. The treatise begins with a vision. The narrator, whom later tradition identified with Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, a figure that synthesizes the Greek god Hermes with the Egyptian Thoth, describes being in a state between sleep and waking when an immense presence appears to him. That presence identifies itself as Poimandres, the mind of the Absolute, and the first thing it shows the narrator is the creation of the world. Poimandres says, I quote Copenhaver's translation of the original Greek text, that in the beginning there was a limitless, pure, joyful light, and in that light was the nous, the mind, the divine intellect. From the nous emerged a logos, a word, an organizing reason that began to order the primordial matter that lay in the depths as formless darkness. Up to this point, the text sounds like standard Platonic cosmology. But then Poimandres takes a turn that has fascinated philosophers for 17 centuries. The nous loved its own creation, and that love produced the anthropos, the primordial man, not the human being of flesh and blood reading these words, the archetype, the divine image before taking material form. Poimandres describes the anthropos as a creature of pure light, of a beauty identical to that of the nous that generated him. A being that was, in the vocabulary of the treatise, coessential with the Father. And here comes the central moment, the moment that everything else in the Corpus Hermeticum presupposes. The anthropos looked down. He saw his own image reflected in material nature, in the lower waters, the text says, and he fell in love with that image. He leaned toward it, and in doing so, he descended. The text says, with a precision that commentators have analyzed for centuries, nature embraced him completely, and they mingled because they loved each other. The anthropos became trapped in matter, not as a punishment, not out of disobedience, out of love, out of the desire to touch his own reflection, stay for a moment with that image. The origin of the human body, according to the first treatise of the Corpus Hermeticum, is not a moral fall, but a descent out of love. The divine being that we are, if the text is right, did not arrive in matter because he was expelled from paradise. He arrived because he saw something beautiful in the waters of the world and wanted to touch it. Poimandres does not present that as a mistake. It presents it as a consequence of love. And that changes everything. Now comes the part that the hermetists of the Renaissance found devastating in its beauty. Poimandres describes the descent of the anthropos through 7 spheres, 7 cosmic layers, 7 stages of the journey from light to the dense matter we inhabit. In Hermetic cosmology, which takes from Ptolemaic Greek astronomy and radically transforms it, these 7 spheres correspond to the 7 planets known in antiquity: the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. In that order, from the closest to Earth outward. Upon descending through each sphere, the anthropos received a particular quality, a vesture, a layer of being that was not originally his, but was added by the cosmic principle that governed each level. Treatise 1 lists them with a precision that commentators find unsettling. From the first sphere, the Moon, he received the capacity to wax and wane, the cyclical rhythm of material existence. From the second sphere, Mercury, he received the capacity to contrive evil, tactical intelligence applied to limited ends. From the third sphere, Venus, he received the desire that longs without rest. From the fourth sphere, the Sun, he received the arrogance of dominance. From the fifth sphere, Mars, he received impious daring. From the sixth sphere, Jupiter, he received the impulses of excess in wealth. And from the seventh sphere, Saturn, he received the falsehood that lies in wait. 7 spheres, 7 vestures, 7 layers of the human personality that the Corpus Hermeticum identifies not as part of the divine nature of the anthropos, but as acquisitions of the descent. Layers that do not belong to the original being, layers that, for that very reason, can be recognized and, in time, let go. And then Poimandres says something that stops time. He who has nous, let him recognize that he is immortal, and that the cause of death is love. The same love that caused the descent is, potentially, the cause of the return, but only if it is recognized for what it is. At this point in the video, I want to pause, because what you have just heard is the philosophical core around which the entire Hermetic tradition was built, not an interpretation, not a version adapted for the 21st century. Treatise 1, Section 15 of the Corpus Hermeticum. If you want to verify it, Copenhaver's translation has critical apparatus notes that trace every sentence back to its Greek sources. It is in libraries. It is in the historical record. Before continuing, I want to tell you something. If this material opened something in you, that feeling that there is a grammar of the world that no one taught you in school but that you recognize when you hear it, I invite you to learn about the pneumatic code. It is the guide we created for those who want to go deeper into these texts. The complete Corpus Hermeticum in context, the Nag Hammadi treatises, the reading tradition that connects everything. The link is in the description and pinned in the comments. Only available while this video is active. Stay. Because what the text says about the gate of return is just beginning. Well, 7 spheres of descent, 7 acquired vestures. Now the question that Poimandres spends the rest of the treatise answering: how do we return? And here is where the hand comes in, not metaphorically. The Hermetic tradition that developed over centuries from the Corpus Hermeticum, and which we can trace through Iamblichus in the 4th century, Proclus in the 5th century, the Chaldean oracles, and later the Hermetists of the Florentine Renaissance, elaborated a system of correspondences between the human body and the cosmic architecture of the descent. If the anthropos descended through 7 spheres and acquired 7 qualities, then the body, which is the densest point of that descent, should carry the marks of that journey engraved upon its own geography. The hand was chosen by Hermetic practitioners as the most complete map of that architecture, not because it is mystical in itself, but because it is the part of the body that most directly expresses human will, the capacity to take, create, give, transform, the logos in its physical form, intention made action in the material world. and the palm was divided according to the 7 planetary spheres of the descent. This is not popular almanac astrology. The Alexandrian Hermetists took the anatomical topography of the hand, its mounts, its lines, its specific regions, and assigned them to the 7 cosmic principles of the descent. We have documentation of these correspondences in the writings of Claudius Ptolemy, in the texts of Firmicus Maternus from the 4th century, in the tradition that Marsilio Ficino synthesized in his work De Vita in the year 1489. The region below the index finger corresponds to Jupiter. The region below the middle finger corresponds to Saturn. The region below the ring finger corresponds to the Sun. The region below the pinky corresponds to Mercury. The region on the outer edge of the palm corresponds to the Moon, and the region in the center of the palm corresponds to Mars, and the region at the base of the thumb, the thenar eminence, that raised and fleshy mound you just observed, corresponds to Venus, the 3rd sphere, the sphere of the desire that longs without rest. Why Venus? Return to Poimandres. Remember what the anthropos received when passing through the 3rd sphere. Epithymia, the Greek word that translators render as desire or longing, the inclination toward the loved object that cannot be fully satisfied by the possession of that object, the desire that always wants more, not because it is defective, but because it is aiming towards something that matter cannot fully contain. Venus, in Hermetic cosmology, is not simply the planet of romantic love as understood by the modern horoscope. It is the cosmic principle that expresses the attraction between opposites, the movement of the one toward the other, the force that makes the anthropos lean toward the water to see his own reflection. It is, in the vocabulary of Poimandres, the primary cause of the descent. And also, this is what the Hermetists considered philosophically most important. It is the possible cause of the return. The same desire that led the anthropos downward, reoriented, can lead him upward. Epithymia directed not toward the reflection in the material waters, but toward the light from which he came. The love that caused the descent, if recognized for what it is, becomes the engine of the ascent. The Corpus Hermeticum, Treatise 4, says, "The nous is the helmsman of the soul, and the soul that wants to return needs a rudder. It needs a fulcrum where the will can find leverage." That is what the Renaissance Hermetists called the gate of Venus, the point in the architecture of the body where desire, the impulse that brought you here, to this body, to this life, can be recognized, named, and reoriented. And that point, according to this tradition, is at the base of the left thumb. There is a question that arises immediately. Why the left? This is a question that deserves a careful answer because in the Hermetic tradition the distinction between right and left is not trivial and has roots in precise philosophical arguments. The Corpus Hermeticum describes the material world as governed by a demiurge, a secondary maker, not the original nous, but a manifestation of it that operates at the level of visible nature. The demiurge is the craftsman of the material cosmos, the one who builds and administers the 7 planetary spheres. In Hermetism, and this is important because Hermetism is not Syrian Gnosticism, which considers matter intrinsically evil, the demiurge fulfills a necessary and legitimate function in the plan of the nous. But he operates on the plane of manifestation, not on the plane of the original light. The Hermetic tradition, relying on the Pythagorean correspondences that the Alexandria of the imperial period intensely absorbed, associated the right side of the body with the active, the solar, that which is projected outward, the domain of action in the material world, the territory of the demiurge, and it associated the left side with the receptive, the lunar, that which is oriented inward, the channel through which the nous can reach the being that is trapped in matter. The left hand, in this scheme, is not the hand of evil, as late medieval superstitions perverted it until it was unrecognizable. It is the hand that listens, the hand that receives, the hand that, in Hermetic topography, is oriented toward the origin rather than toward manifestation. So the gate of return is not on the right hand because the right hand is the instrument of action in the material world. It is on the left hand because that is the hand the anthropos extends when he wants to touch something that is not on this plane. Now, I want to bring you to the text with more technical precision because it is very easy for all of this to sound like speculative elaboration, and I need you to see exactly where each piece comes from. Treatise 1 of the Corpus Hermeticum, the Poimandres, describes the soul's path of return in sections 24 through 26. I quote Copenhaver's translation, "He who has nous shall recognize himself, and he who recognizes himself enters into the good." And then the text describes the process of shedding the 7 vestures acquired during the descent. Upon passing through each sphere in the ascent, the soul surrenders what it took at that level. It surrenders to the first sphere the capacity to wax and wane, to the second, the machinations of evil, to the third, Venus. It surrenders the desire that longs without rest. Notice what the text does not say. It does not say that desire is destroyed. It does not say that it is punished or suppressed. It says that it is surrendered. It is left in the sphere of Venus, cleansed of its attachment to the purely material, available for something different. The Hermetic text, and this is what modern commentators like Garth Fowden and Wouter Hanegraaff emphasize in their academic works, is not dualistic in the extreme Gnostic sense that considers matter intrinsically evil. Hermetism considers matter as a valid and necessary expression of the nous. What must be recognized and let go is not love, but the partial direction of love. That moment of recognition, that instant in which the ascending soul passes through the third sphere and sees desire for what it is, an impulse that aimed toward the nous but became trapped in the reflection, is what the Renaissance Hermetic tradition called the opening of the gate of Venus. And the practitioners of Hermetic theurgy, the ritual practice that sought to actualize in the physical body what the texts described in cosmological terms, located that moment of recognition in the left hand, on the Mount of Venus. Marsilio Ficino, who translated the Corpus Hermeticum into Latin in the winter of 1463 at the commission of Cosimo de' Medici, wrote in his letters that upon reading the Poimandres for the first time, he felt he was remembering something, not learning something. That distinction, remembering versus learning, is central to the Hermetic project. The Corpus Hermeticum does not claim to give new information. It aims to awaken what is already in the inner nous of the reader. The Greek technical word for this process is anamnesis, which literally means unforgetting, the recovery of what was forgotten before arrival in the body. The same word that Plato uses in the Meno to describe how the soul remembers the mathematical truths it already knew before being born in flesh. Hermetism takes that Platonic idea and makes it specifically bodily. The soul does not remember only in the abstract intellect. It remembers in the concrete body. The body carries the marks of the journey the soul made to get here. And those marks, if one learns to read them, are the map of the way back. The thenar eminence of the left hand, the region that Hermetic practitioners identified with the third sphere of the descent, with Venus, with reorientable desire, with the gate. Not a magical gate that opens with a ritual, a gate of recognition, the instant in which the being trapped in matter, who came down out of love, who mingled with nature because he saw his own reflection in the waters and wanted to touch it, looks at that part of his own body and says, "I know what you are. I know where I come from. I know where I am going." There is a moment in Treatise 13 of the Corpus Hermeticum, the treatise called On Rebirth, that Bishop Irenaeus of Lyons cited in the 2nd century to attack it, which is deeply ironic because by attacking it he preserved it for posterity. The passage says, "To him who knows the body, no one can take anything away." Commentators have debated that phrase for 17 centuries. The most literal interpretation, that knowledge of the body grants some form of magical protection, was the one Irenaeus cited to accuse the Hermetists of claiming supernatural powers. But the interpretation that the Hermetists themselves defended in their texts was radically different. Knowing the body, in the vocabulary of the Corpus Hermeticum, does not mean knowing anatomy. It means knowing the origin of the body, where it came from, which sphere contributed which vesture, what marks of the descent it carries engraved upon its geography. It means reading the body as the text that it is. The body is, in Hermetic cosmology, the most faithful witness of the soul's journey. It does not lie. It cannot lie because it has no will for illusion. Each region, each point, each zone carries inscribed something of the Anthropos's passage through the spheres that shaped him. And if that is true, if the body is a legible text, a miniature cosmology, then the area you are looking at on your left hand is not decorative, it is informative. I want to take you now to a historical detail that few people know, even among scholars of Hermetism, because it changes the way we understand the urgency with which this tradition was transmitted. In the year 1462, a monk named Leonardo of Pistoia arrived in Florence carrying a Greek manuscript of unknown provenance. He delivered it to Cosimo de' Medici, the most powerful man in Italy at that time. Cosimo was 73 years old. He was dying, and he made a decision that historians of philosophy have analyzed as one of the most revealing gestures of the entire Renaissance. He ordered Marsilio Ficino, who at that moment was translating the complete works of Plato at the commission of Cosimo himself, to stop that work, to put Plato aside, to translate the newly arrived Greek manuscript first. Why? Because Cosimo believed the manuscript was older than Plato. He believed it was the source from which Plato himself had drunk. The Prisca Theologia, the primordial wisdom from which all the philosophical and religious traditions of the Mediterranean world had emerged. Ficino translated the Corpus Hermeticum in a few months. The translation was called Poimandres. It was one of the most widely read books of the European Renaissance. It was held in the libraries of Giordano Bruno, Pico della Mirandola, Paracelsus, Agrippa von Nettesheim. Leonardo da Vinci cited it in his notebooks. It directly influenced Kepler's works on the music of the spheres and Isaac Newton's alchemical writings. The founders of 17th-century speculative Freemasonry knew and cited it. And in all those contexts, the concept of the planetary gates as active zones in the human body was transmitted, elaborated, and practiced, not as a superstition, as what the Corpus Hermeticum itself calls it, knowledge, gnosis of the body as text. Let us return now to the text, because the tradition built upon it is fascinating but cannot replace it. Treatise 4 of the Corpus Hermeticum is called the Mixing Bowl or the Monad. It is one of the shortest in the corpus, but one of the most philosophically dense. It says that the nous sent a basin filled with nous down to earth and sent a herald to announce, "He who has a heart, let him dip himself in this basin. He who believes, let him be baptized in the nous." Hermetists interpret this passage as the description of a voluntary and active process. Not all flesh receives nous in equal measure, not because there are privileged souls and disinherited souls, but because the reception of nous requires an act of recognition. It requires that the being trapped in matter turn inward, upward, toward the direction of its origin. The Greek technical term for that turn is epistrophe. The turn back. The soul that turns toward the light from which it came initiates the process of the gates, and the gates, the spheres that must be passed in the ascent, are not outside in the sky. They are in the body. They are in the layers of being that accumulated during the descent. The gate of Venus, the base of the left thumb, according to the tradition that developed these correspondences, is the gate of recognized desire. The point where the soul stops and says, "This that I feel, this longing that cannot be filled by any material possession, by any relationship, by any achievement, by any success. This longing aims toward something that is higher up on the journey. This longing is not a defect in my character. It is not a sign that something is broken in me. It is a compass that points toward the sphere that generated it, which is still there, which is not closed." There is a passage in Treatise 10 of the Corpus Hermeticum, called the Key, that the Renaissance tradition took as the most direct description of what it means to activate these bodily correspondences. The text says, "The man who has received gnosis and has seen the good can no longer desire anything else, because the good is the only object worthy of desire." Notice what the text does not say. It does not say that desire disappears with gnosis. It says that it is transformed. It becomes so pure, so aligned with its origin, that it can only point toward one thing: the nous, the original light, the state prior to the descent through the seven spheres. And the body, with its zones, its gates, its geography of descent, is the place where that transformation occurs, not in the abstract mind or in intellectual philosophical thought. In the specific flesh, in the concrete region where Venus left her mark when the Anthropos passed through the third sphere and received the desire that brought him here, the thenar eminence of the left hand, millimeters of soft tissue, a slight bulge between the thumb and the palm, something you have seen thousands of times without seeing it. Treatise 12 of the Corpus Hermeticum, called On the Common Mind, says something that modern commentators frequently cite because it seems to describe an experience that anyone can recognize. I cannot explain this to one who has not seen it. Only he who has seen it can know what I say. Hermetism is not a doctrine of secret initiates guarding information for themselves. It is a tradition that recognizes that certain understandings are not transmitted by description but by recognition. I cannot show you your gate of Venus. I can only point in its direction and hope that something in you turns toward that spot. That is why the tradition did not give instructions. It gave maps, maps of the body, maps of the hand, maps of the geography of the descent, which is also, read in reverse, the geography of the return. There is a text by Iamblichus, the 4th century Neoplatonist philosopher who knew the Corpus Hermeticum deeply, in which he describes Hermetic theurgic practice in these terms: we do not do what we do to force the gods to come down. We do what we do to remember that we already came down ourselves. That inversion is fundamental. Hermetism is not a practice of invocation. It does not call forces from the outside inward. It is a practice of recognition. It recognizes what is already present in the body as a mark of the descent, and in that recognition, it opens the possibility of the ascent. The gate of return does not open with a ritual. It opens with an honest question about what is engraved in the area of the body where Venus left her signature when the Anthropos passed through the third sphere. What desire is there that cannot be filled by any material thing? What longing has been pointing for years towards something that possessions, achievements, relationships, social approval cannot reach? The Corpus Hermeticum says that this longing is not a mistake. It is the echo of the third sphere, the memory of what epithymia actually was before becoming confused with its material objects. I want to pause before the end of this video to tell you something directly. What you heard today is not esoteric entertainment content. It is what the texts actually say, what Hermes Trismegistus said according to Treatise 1, what Iamblichus said in the 4th century, what Ficino translated in the winter of 1463 when Cosimo de' Medici preferred these pages to everything else he had left of his time to read. YouTube stopped monetizing us and kept placing ads on our videos anyway, collecting that income while we received nothing. So we created the pneumatic code, not as a business, as the only way to keep this channel running without depending on a system that actively works against us. If what you found here mattered to you, the link is in the description and pinned in the comments. Only available while this video is active. If you believe that information like this must continue reaching more people, the link is there. That is how this flame is kept burning. The Corpus Hermeticum survived centuries of deliberate silence. This flame also survives, thanks to you. Now return to your hand. Look at that spot, the base of the left thumb. That small mound you never chose to have, that appeared while the Anthropos descended through the third sphere and received what Poimandres calls epithymia, the desire that longs without rest. 17 centuries of Hermetic transmission maintain that this spot on your body is the place where that desire has its most legible bodily signature, the place where Venus left her mark in the descent, and also, if the Corpus Hermeticum is right, the place where the turnback, the epistrophe, can begin, not in the sky, not in a temple, not after years of initiation, in the palm of the left hand, in the soft tissue below the thumb. Treatise 1 says that the Anthropos who has nous will recognize himself. It does not say when. It does not say under what circumstances. It does not prescribe a specific practice or a necessary master. It only says that he who recognizes himself enters into the good. That recognition, the act of seeing the map of the descent engraved on the body and understanding what it means, is what the tradition called the opening of the gate. Not a supernatural event, an act of reading one's own body as the cosmological text that, according to the Corpus Hermeticum, it always was. And here is the question that the text does not answer, because it cannot be answered from the outside, only from within. If the desire that brought you to this world, the same impulse that made the anthropos lean over the water to see his own reflection and want to touch it, if that desire has its mark on your body, in that area you have just observed, where is yours pointing right now? Not the abstract philosophical question, the concrete question, the lived question. In this instant, looking at that area of your left hand, what do you desire that nothing on this plane can give you? The Corpus Hermeticum does not promise that the answer will come easily or quickly. It only points out that the question has to be asked in the body, not about the body, that the gate is not seen from the outside, that the turn back begins at the exact point where the descent began. Perhaps that begins with something as small as looking at your own hand and not looking away.